A jiu-jitsu black belt attacked a royal guard without imagining that the soldier would break protocol to retaliate in the worst possible way. The crowd watched attentively as the black belt suffered the greatest humiliation of his life. The morning in London was cold but clear when Thomas Brennan stepped out of the taxi in front of Buckingham Palace. He adjusted the jiu-jitsu GI he wore open over his expensive shirt, deliberately letting the black belt hang so that everyone could see it. At 34 years old, Thomas had built an empire of jiu-jitsu academies in California, and he never missed an opportunity to remind people of that. His Instagram account had 500,000 followers, and every post showed him submitting opponents or posing with championship belts. The bio simply read, "Finisher, champion, unstoppable." Take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and drop a comment so I can return the favor with a beautiful heart. "Look at this," Thomas said to the 3 men accompanying him, all wearing the same custom GIs with his academy's logo. "These guys just stand there all day? On my mat, anyone who stands still loses." The friends laughed. Derek, his main training partner, nodded. "In jiu-jitsu, movement is life. Those guards wouldn't last 10 seconds in a roll with me." Thomas observed the nearest royal guard, a serious-looking man with an impeccable red uniform and the tall bearskin hat. The guard was completely motionless, eyes fixed forward, rifle at his side. His name was Patrick Donnelly. He was 30 years old, and he had already served 9 years in the Royal Guard. But nothing in his posture revealed the 4 missions he had completed in the Middle East, or the special training he had received before earning that position. "That's not defense," Thomas continued, his voice loud enough for nearby tourists to hear. "That's decoration. In the real world, you have to always be ready to react, always moving, always adapting." He began circling the guard, analyzing the posture as he would an opponent before a fight. "Look at his base, completely wrong. No bend in the knees, no weight distribution. A simple takedown and he goes down." A larger group of tourists began to gather, some filming with their phones. Thomas loved the audience. It was what motivated him, what fed his ego. He lived for these moments of attention. "You know what the problem with tradition is?" Thomas asked no one in particular, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "It traps you in the past. These uniforms, these old rifles, all this rigidity, this would be destroyed in any real combat situation." Derek and the others positioned themselves around him, forming a semicircle. All wore the same custom GIs, a visual wall of coordinated arrogance. "This is Derek," Thomas introduced, pointing to the tallest of the group. "Black belt, Brazilian middleweight champion, and over there is Paulo, 2-time state champion in California." An older man in the crowd frowned. It was General Robert Sterling, retired after 35 years in the British Armed Forces. He was in London visiting his daughter, but he immediately recognized what was happening. He had seen this type of behavior before, overly confident young men who confused technical skill with true combat capability. "I'll show you," Thomas announced, "the difference between ceremonial posture and real fighting posture." He demonstrated a jiu-jitsu guard stance, body low, hands extended, weight distributed. "This is how you protect yourself, always mobile, always ready to grip, pull, submit." Thomas began making grappling movements in the air around the guard, simulating takedowns and submissions. "See how I'm constantly adjusting, constantly seeking angles? This is modern combat. This is effective." Patrick Donnelly did not move. His eyes remained fixed on a distant point. He had learned long ago that reacting to provocation was exactly what people like Thomas wanted. Discipline was not about having the urge to respond and suppressing it. Discipline was not even considering responding as a valid option. His job was clear. Hold position, protect the palace, represent the crown. Nothing else mattered. Do you know how long it takes to master jiu-jitsu? Thomas continued his speech. Years, decades, every movement refined through thousands of repetitions against resisting opponents. It's not like standing still following orders. A Japanese woman in the crowd whispered to her husband, "This isn't right. He's being very disrespectful." "I know," the husband replied quietly. "But we can't do anything." Thomas stepped even closer to the guard, now just inches away. "On the mat, we have a saying, position before submission. You need to control the position first. And look at this guy. He doesn't even have a proper defensive position." He executed a quick movement, pretending to pull the guard's leg for a takedown, stopping centimeters before contact. The crowd gasped. Some people began backing away, uncomfortable with the escalation. General Sterling started walking toward the group, but Derek blocked his path. "Relax, old man. It's just an educational demonstration. Nobody's getting hurt." "Your friend is making a very serious mistake," Sterling said calmly, his voice carrying the authority of decades of command. "That guard is not what he thinks." "Of course he's not," Derek laughed. "He's a British wax figure." Sterling shook his head but didn't insist. Sometimes people needed to learn the hard way. Thomas was energized now, fueled by attention and cameras. "I'm going to show exactly what would happen if this kind of static defense faced modern grappling techniques." He demonstrated an entry for a sweep, moving quickly around the guard. First, you compromise the base. Then you control the hips, then you finish. The tourists were divided. Some looked entertained, others clearly uncomfortable. A British family pulled their children away, the parents exchanging disapproving looks. "These guards represent an old era," Thomas proclaimed, now completely immersed in his role as lecturer. "When wars were fought in organized lines and appearance mattered more than efficiency, but combat evolved, jiu-jitsu evolved, we evolved." He paused theatrically. "And they stayed stuck in time." Patrick Donnelly remained motionless, but inside him, processes were happening. Not anger, because anger had been trained out of him years earlier, not frustration, because that was also useless. It was more a cold, professional assessment. He was categorizing threats, calculating potential responses, maintaining total awareness of everything around him while appearing completely oblivious. His 3 missions in Afghanistan had taught skills no jiu-jitsu mat could ever replicate. He had operated in environments where mistakes meant death, where situational awareness was a matter of survival, where violence was a professional tool applied with surgical precision when necessary and restrained with iron discipline when not. "I think," Thomas said, his voice taking on a more serious tone, "that we need a practical demonstration. Theory only goes so far." He looked around at the crowd, making sure all cameras were recording. "I'll show exactly why static posture like this doesn't work against a trained grappler." General Sterling stepped forward again. "Young man, I strongly recommend that you reconsider what you are about to do." Thomas turned, irritated by the interruption. "Who are you?" "Someone with enough experience to recognize when a civilian is about to learn a painful lesson about the difference between sport and military service." "Sport?" Thomas laughed. "Jiu-jitsu isn't sport, old man. It's martial art. It's real combat." "It is combat with rules, referees, and padded mats," Sterling replied calmly. "These guards operate in a different world." "We'll see," Thomas said, turning back to Patrick Donnelly. He assumed a fighting stance, body low, hands extended. The crowd fell completely silent. Even the people filming seemed to hold their breath. "Sorry about this, man," Thomas said to the guard, his voice carrying false sympathy. "But someone needs to show that tradition doesn't beat technique." Then he moved. Thomas shot in fast, seeking control of the guard's hips as he would in any competition. His hands reached Patrick's uniform, trying to establish grips for a clean takedown. It was a movement he had executed thousands of times, a basic entry any purple belt in jiu-jitsu would know. But Patrick Donnelly did not react like a mat opponent. For one crucial second, he remained completely still, allowing Thomas to establish grips, allowing him to fully commit to the movement. It was a combat tactic Thomas did not recognize because he had never faced someone with real military training, someone who understood that sometimes you let the opponent commit before exploiting the opening. Then Patrick moved. It was not the smooth positional transition jiu-jitsu competitors practice. It was a controlled explosion of professional violence, executed with precision born from situations where hesitation cost lives. His rifle dropped to the ground with a metallic clang. His hands, trained in military close-quarters combat, broke Thomas's grips with force that made the fighter gasp in surprise. Before Thomas could react, Patrick had completely reversed the position. What happened in the next 3 seconds was a clinical demonstration of why sport combat and military combat are fundamentally different things. Patrick did not seek a beautiful submission or competition points. He neutralized the threat with brutal efficiency. A precise strike to Thomas's hands broke the base the fighter was trying to build. A hip movement Derek did not recognize because it did not exist in jiu-jitsu competitions, sent Thomas crashing fully to the ground. The impact of the stones in the courtyard knocked the air out of Thomas's lungs. This was not a controlled fall on a padded mat. This was the hard, cold reality of real combat. Before he could process what had happened, Patrick was on top of him. Not in a jiu-jitsu mount seeking a submission, but in a tactical control position, knee placed with precision on Thomas's sternum, pressure sufficient to completely immobilize, but not to cause permanent damage. The crowd erupted in shocked exclamations. Cameras captured everything, but no one was laughing now. The atmosphere had completely shifted from entertainment to something far more serious. Thomas tried to react, his competition reflexes taking over. He sought guard recovery, tried to establish hooks, searched for any familiar jiu-jitsu technique that might reverse the position. Every movement was neutralized with efficiency that left Thomas completely disoriented. Patrick was not rolling with him. He was not competing. He was applying professional restraint, and every adjustment he made it clearer that Thomas was drastically out of his depth. "Stay still," Patrick spoke for the first time, his voice carrying absolute authority but no anger. "This ends now." Derek and Paolo instinctively stepped forward, but stopped when they saw the expression on the guard's face. It was not threat or provocation. It was professional certainty from someone who knew exactly how much force he had in reserve and exactly how much he was using. General Sterling finally managed to get past the human barrier Thomas's group had created. He looked at the scene with an expression that mixed grim satisfaction with sadness for what he knew was coming next. "Young man," he said to Thomas, who was still struggling uselessly under Patrick's control, "you have just learned an important distinction between martial technique and military combat." Thomas tried to speak, but struggled to breathe under the pressure on his chest. "He can't. This is assault." "No, sir," Sterling interrupted calmly. "This is legitimate defense against an aggression you initiated, and I suggest you stop struggling before Guard Donnelly needs to increase the level of force used." Palace security was arriving quickly, radios crackling with urgent communications. A senior officer assessed the situation with a trained glance and immediately understood what had happened. "Guard Donnelly," he said professionally. "Situation under control?" "Yes, sir," Patrick replied, without taking his eyes off Thomas. "Aggressor contained, awaiting instructions. Maintain position until the Metropolitan Police arrive." Derek finally found his voice. "Wait, police? Why? It was just a demonstration that got out of hand." Sterling turned to him with a look that had made far more experienced soldiers step back. "Your friend physically assaulted a member of the Queen's Guard on active duty. This is not a joke. This is not a misunderstanding. This is a serious crime under British law." Reality began to penetrate through the arrogance of Thomas's group. Paolo took a step back, suddenly very aware of how many cameras had captured everything. Derek looked around at the crowd of tourists, seeing not admiration, but shock, and, on many faces, clear disapproval. "Guard Donnelly," Sterling said, turning his attention to Patrick. "Are you injured?" "No, sir. The situation was resolved before escalation was necessary." "Well done." Sterling paused, then added for the benefit of Thomas and anyone close enough to hear. "What you have just witnessed, ladies and gentlemen, was not a ceremonial soldier getting lucky. It was a trained soldier applying exactly the amount of force necessary to neutralize a threat while minimizing harm." He pointed to Patrick. Guard Donnelly served 4 missions in combat zones before being selected for the Royal Guard. The immobility Mr. Brennan confused with weakness is the product of discipline that allows these soldiers to remain calm under pressure, far greater than provocation from an arrogant tourist. Thomas finally stopped struggling. Humiliation was beginning to outweigh shock. He had been taken down and controlled in seconds by someone he had ridiculed as a wax figure. And it had all been captured on video by dozens of cameras. "I didn't know," he began, but Sterling cut him off. "No, you didn't know. And that is exactly the point. You assumed that your experience on padded mats with rules and referees translated to any combat situation. You confused technical skill in a controlled environment with real capacity to deal with violence." The Metropolitan Police arrived, trained officers quickly assessing the scene. The supervising sergeant approached Sterling, immediately recognizing the discreet medals on the older man's lapel. "General Sterling, sir," the officer said respectfully. "Could you give us a summary of the situation?" "Certainly, Sergeant. Mr. Brennan here," Sterling gestured to Thomas, still restrained, "spent approximately 15 minutes provoking and ridiculing Guard Donnelly. He then initiated physical aggression, which the guard neutralized with the minimum force necessary." The sergeant nodded, making notes. "Witnesses?" "Approximately 50 tourists," Sterling replied, "and I suspect at least 20 videos of the incident are already being posted on social media." "Understood." The sergeant turned to Patrick. "Guard Donnelly, you may release the suspect. We'll take custody." Patrick rose with the same fluid precision he had used to take Thomas down. He stepped back and, remarkably, returned to attention exactly where he had been before, even without his rifle. Thomas rose slowly, body aching from the impact with the stones. Derek and Paolo moved to help him, but the officers gently but firmly kept them back. "Mr. Brennan," the sergeant said formally, "you are under arrest on suspicion of assaulting a military officer on duty. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defense if you do not mention, when questioned, something you later rely on in court." The words continued, the formal caution echoing through the courtyard. Thomas heard them but did not fully process them. This could not be happening. He was a champion. He had academies. He had 500,000 followers. And he had just been humiliated and arrested in front of Buckingham Palace. At the police station, Thomas sat in a cold interrogation room, the reality of his situation finally breaking through his wounded ego. Derek and Paolo were released after giving statements, but Thomas was facing formal charges: assaulting a military officer on duty, breach of the peace. Possibly more, depending on how the Crown Prosecution Service decided to proceed. A young officer entered, carrying a folder of documents. He sat across the table, studying Thomas with a neutral expression. "Mr. Brennan," he began, "do you understand the seriousness of the situation?" "It was a misunderstanding," Thomas said quickly. "I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. It was a technical demonstration that involved you physically grabbing an active duty soldier on ceremonial duty," the officer interrupted. After 15 minutes of verbal and physical provocation documented by multiple cameras. He opened the folder. "We have already received 17 different videos of the incident. All clearly show you escalating the aggression, ignoring the discomfort of other tourists, and ultimately attacking Guard Donnelly." Thomas closed his eyes. "What's the penalty for this?" "It depends. Assaulting a military officer on duty can result in up to 6 months in prison and a substantial fine. But considering the circumstances, the public nature of the incident, and the fact that you are a foreign visitor..." The officer paused. "The prosecution may decide to make an example." The door opened again, and General Sterling entered, followed by a middle-aged man in an impeccable military uniform. Thomas recognized the insignia as that of a high-ranking officer, though he did not know exactly which rank. "Mr. Brennan," Sterling said, sitting down, "this is Colonel Michael Hayes, commander of Guard Donnelly's unit. He requested to be present for this conversation." Thomas looked between the two men, trying to read their expressions. Hayes had a face marked by years of service, eyes that had seen far more than any competition mat ever could. "I want you to understand something," Hayes began, his voice carrying calm authority. "Royal Guards are not ceremonial positions given to just any soldier. They are assigned to service members who have demonstrated exceptional excellence in combat and discipline." He opened his own folder, removing documents. Guard Donnelly, prior to his current assignment, served in the Special Reconnaissance Regiment, 4 missions in conflict zones, 2 commendations for bravery, specialized training in close combat, counterinsurgency, and urban tactical operations. Thomas felt his stomach sink further. "The immobility you ridiculed," Hayes continued, "is the product of discipline that allows these soldiers to operate in environments where the smallest mistake can result in death. The restraint you confused with weakness is the same quality that keeps them alive when facing real threats." Sterling leaned forward. "Mr. Brennan, you have built an impressive career in jiu-jitsu. That deserves respect. But you made the fundamental mistake of assuming that your area of excellence automatically translated to every combat situation. Jiu-jitsu," Hayes added, "is a magnificent martial art. In a competitive environment with clear rules and referees, it is extremely effective. But soldiers like Guard Donnelly are trained for completely different contexts. Contexts where there is no referee to stop the fight, where there is no mat to cushion falls, where the objective is not to score points, but to neutralize threats as efficiently as possible." The police officer who had remained quiet interjected. "Mr. Brennan, Guard Donnelly has chosen not to press additional charges for physical assault. He is satisfied that his response was proportional and that you were detained. That is unusually generous, given the circumstances." Thomas looked up, genuine surprise crossing his face. He isn't going to sue?" "No," Hayes replied, "because Guard Donnelly understands something you are still learning. That true strength is not measured by how many people you can dominate, but by how much control you can exercise. He could have seriously injured you. Instead, he used exactly the force necessary to neutralize the situation." Sterling nodded. "That is the difference between a sport fighter and a professional soldier. A soldier understands that violence is a tool of last resort, applied with surgical precision only when absolutely necessary. But," the police officer added, "you are still facing formal charges of public order offenses and behavior that caused alarm and distress. The prosecution is deciding how to proceed." Thomas put his head in his hands. His empire of academies, his sponsors, his carefully built reputation, everything was at risk because of 15 minutes of stupid arrogance. "Can I speak to him?" Thomas asked quietly. "To Guard Donnelly, I want to apologize properly." Hayes and Sterling exchanged looks, After a moment of silence, Hayes nodded. I can arrange that after his shift ends, but understand that Guard Donnelly has no obligation to accept your apology or to make this easier for you. I understand. 2 hours later, Thomas was in a different room when Patrick Donnelly entered, now in a regular duty uniform instead of ceremonial dress. He looked smaller without the tall hat, more human, but his eyes still carried that focused clarity Thomas had seen in the moment before being taken down. Guard Donnelly, Thomas began, standing. I want to apologize, deeply, for the disrespect, for the provocation, for everything. Patrick nodded slightly but said nothing, simply waiting. I built my whole career on jiu-jitsu, Thomas continued, and somewhere along the way I started believing it made me superior, that my training was more real, more effective than anything else. I was completely wrong. You were not wrong that your training is effective. Patrick finally spoke, his voice calm. Jiu-jitsu is highly effective in the appropriate context. Your mistake was assuming that the competitive context and the military context are interchangeable. He paused. On the mat, you seek a beautiful submission, perfect technique, a display of skill. In the field, I seek to neutralize the threat as quickly as possible with minimal risk to me and others. The objectives are fundamentally different. Thomas nodded slowly. How did you stay so calm? I provoked you for 15 minutes and you didn't even blink. Because provocation is not a threat, Patrick replied simply. I've been shot at. I've faced improvised explosive devices. I've operated in environments where a judgment error meant not only my death but the death of teammates. An arrogant tourist doing jiu-jitsu movements doesn't register remotely as a real threat. But when I grabbed you, when you initiated physical contact, the nature of the situation changed. You crossed the line from provocation to aggression. At that point, I had the authority and the obligation to respond. Thomas sat down again, processing. You could have seriously hurt me, couldn't you? Patrick did not answer directly. Instead, he said, part of military training is understanding the spectrum of force, verbal presence, physical control, less lethal force. Lethal force. You learn to calibrate your response to the level of threat. You represented embarrassment and disturbance, not lethal danger. So you received an appropriate response. Restraint, Thomas said, remembering Sterling's words. Exactly. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Thomas asked, what happens now? To me, I mean. That depends on the prosecution and the judge. But I can tell you this. The lesson you learned today is more valuable than any punishment the legal system can apply. You learned the limits of your own experience. You learned that skill in one area does not automatically translate to all areas. And you learned, I hope, a bit of humility. Patrick stood to leave, then stopped. Mr. Brennan, you clearly dedicated years to your craft. That is admirable. But perhaps use that experience to teach your students not only technique, but also respect. Respect for other combat styles. Respect for people who serve in different ways. Respect for the limits of your own knowledge. I will do that, Thomas said sincerely. I promise. After Patrick left, Thomas sat alone with his thoughts. The humiliation still hurt, but it was beginning to be replaced by something deeper. Understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of it. 3 months later, Thomas Brennan was back at his main academy in California. But much had changed. The sign on the wall that once read, undefeated, untouchable, unstoppable, had been replaced with a different quote. True strength is knowing when not to use strength. The incident in London had gone viral, as expected. Videos had been viewed millions of times. Some commentators mocked Thomas mercilessly. Others used it as an example of the difference between sport, martial art, and military combat. He had lost some sponsors, but gained others who appreciated how he handled the consequences. Because Thomas did not try to deny or minimize what happened. He posted his own video, fully acknowledging his mistake, explaining the lessons he learned, and apologizing publicly not only to Patrick Donnelly, but to all royal guards he had disrespected. "I confused technical skill with general superiority," he said in the video. "I assumed that because I'm good at one thing, it made me an authority on everything related to combat. I was profoundly, completely wrong." The brutal honesty resonated. The video received mixed responses, but most comments appreciated his willingness to admit his mistake publicly. Now, teaching a beginner class, Thomas found himself approaching jiu-jitsu differently, not only as techniques to dominate opponents, but as an art that taught deeper principles. "Jiu-jitsu," he told a group of new students, "teaches you a lot about control, about leverage, about using technique instead of brute strength. But it should also teach humility. It should teach respect. It should teach that your area of excellence does not diminish the excellence of others in different areas." A student raised his hand. "Professor, is it true you were arrested in London?" Thomas could have avoided the question. Instead, he decided to use it as a teaching moment. "Yes, it's true. I was arrogant and disrespectful to the British Royal Guard, and I paid the price for it. Not only legally, but in terms of public humiliation and the recognition of my own limitations." He paused, making sure he had everyone's attention. "That guard taught me more in 3 seconds than many years of competition. He taught me that discipline is not weakness, that restraint is not fear, that true strength sometimes means choosing not to display it." "What happened to the charges?" another student asked. "I received a substantial fine, community service, and I'm banned from entering the United Kingdom for 2 years. It could have been much worse. The guard was incredibly generous in not pressing more severe charges." Derek, who still trained at the academy, but with a significantly reduced ego after London, added, "We thought those guards were just decoration. We learned the hard way they are real soldiers with real training and real combat experience." Thomas nodded. "And that is an important lesson for all of you. Jiu-jitsu is amazing. It works. It is effective. But it is not the only effective thing, and context matters enormously. Techniques that work perfectly in competition may not translate to different situations. And people who train for different contexts are not inferior. They just have different objectives." After class, Thomas checked his email and saw a message that made him stop. It was from Patrick Donnelly. "Mr. Brennan, I saw your apology video and was impressed by your honesty. I will be visiting California next month for a training course. If you are willing, I would like to visit your academy. Not for a demonstration or confrontation, but for dialogue about different approaches to combat, and perhaps to find common ground. Sincerely, Patrick Donnelly." Thomas replied immediately, accepting the visit and offering to show Patrick his training curriculum. When Patrick visited a month later, it was a transformative experience for the whole academy. Patrick did not come to compete or prove superiority. He came to share perspective. He explained how military training focused on different objectives than competitive grappling, how they trained to neutralize multiple attackers, deal with weapons, operate in unpredictable environments where there were no rules. "Jiu-jitsu is excellent for what it was designed for," Patrick told the gathered class. "One-on-one, in a controlled environment, it is extremely effective. And principles of leverage and technique over strength are universally valuable. But," he continued, "military training addresses different scenarios, multiple opponents, potential weapons, variable terrain, the need to neutralize threats and continue mission rather than focus on a single submission." He demonstrated with Thomas, showing how military techniques differed from competition techniques. It wasn't superior or inferior, just different, optimized for different objectives. "The mistake," Patrick said, "is assuming one approach is universally superior. In truth, every system has strengths and weaknesses. A jiu-jitsu fighter who understands the limits of his training is far more effective than one who believes it works for everything. The visit ended with genuine mutual respect. Thomas had learned to appreciate a different perspective. Patrick gained a deeper understanding of how much dedication and technique it took to excel in competitive jiu-jitsu. "You know," Thomas said as they were saying goodbye, "I spent years building a reputation as unstoppable, and it took you 3 seconds to show how fragile that reputation really was." Patrick smiled slightly. A reputation built on dominating others will always be fragile. But a reputation built on constant learning, on respecting different forms of excellence, on recognizing your own limitations, that is durable. "Like the uniform you wear," Thomas said, "built on centuries of service and sacrifice, not on individual victories." Exactly. In the months and years that followed, Thomas completely transformed his approach to teaching. He still competed, still won, still was technically excellent, but he added a dimension of humility and respect that had been missing before. He began bringing in guest instructors from other disciplines, not to prove jiu-jitsu superiority, but to show his students that combat was vast, that different approaches served different purposes, that respect for all styles was the mark of a true martial artist. And always, in a place of honor on the wall of the academy, was the photo of him and Patrick Donnelly together, smiling, symbolizing the journey from arrogance to understanding, from humiliation to humility, from believing he knew everything to recognizing how much he still had to learn. Under the photo, a new quote: "Strength without wisdom is dangerous. Technique without respect is empty. The true master never stops being a student." Thomas Brennan went to London as a champion, convinced of his superiority. He returned as a student, finally understanding that the most important lesson any martial art can teach is not how to dominate opponents, but how to master your own ego. And that lesson, painful as it was to learn, was worth more than any belt or trophy he would ever win. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories like this. Share the word "good guard" in the comments so I can leave you a beautiful heart, and tell me, have you ever witnessed or experienced an act of kindness that changed your perspective on life and relationships? Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming stories of the throne.